The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, transforming the small town of Hollow Glen into a desolate swamp of mud and shadow. The streetlights cast sickly halos through the mist, and the air hung heavy with the damp, sour smell of decay. Lizzie pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders as she walked home from her late shift at the diner. The usual hum of life had been muted, no barking dogs, no distant chatter, just the sound of water dripping endlessly into the earth. She took the shortcut through the woods, ignoring the twisting unease in her stomach. It was faster, and she was already running late. The trees loomed, skeletal and black, their wet branches like claws reaching for the sky. Her flashlight barely pierced the suffocating darkness, its beam wavering with every step. Halfway through, she saw it, a shape crouched in the underbrush. At first, she thought it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a stray dog, but as her light passed over it, the figure's pale, human-like features froze her in place. Its skin was stretched too tightly over its skull, its eyes wide and glassy, reflecting her beam like a predator's. The thing grinned, revealing jagged, yellow teeth, and Lizzie stumbled backward, her breath hitching in her throat. The creature didn't move. It simply stared, unblinking, as if it had been waiting for her. Then it whispered, a sound like dry leaves scraping against stone. "You're late." Lizzie didn't wait to understand. She turned and ran, her boots slipping on the wet leaves. The forest seemed to close in around her, the trees leaning closer, the darkness growing thicker. Behind her, the sound of skittering footsteps gave chase, too fast and too many to be human. She didn't dare look back. Bursting out of the woods, she reached the edge of her neighborhood, the familiar sight of houses and streetlights offering a fleeting sense of safety. She slammed her front door shut, locked it, and collapsed against it, chest heaving. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a faint tapping began at the window. It was standing there, its gaunt face pressed against the glass, its grin wider now, impossibly wide. Lizzie backed away, her legs trembling, and grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a lamp. She hurled it at the window, but when the glass shattered, the creature was gone. Only the rain came through, soaking the carpet. The hours dragged on. She stayed awake, clutching a kitchen knife, every creak of the house sending her nerves into overdrive. But as dawn broke, the unease seemed to fade. The world outside looked normal again, the storm having washed the streets clean. She convinced herself it had been a hallucination, the result of exhaustion and stress. But the relief was short-lived. At work that evening, her coworkers avoided her. They whispered when they thought she wasn't listening. Her manager, a gruff man named Pete, pulled her aside. "Lizzie, break time equals 2s/, do you feeling okay?" he asked, not meeting her eyes. "Yeah, why?" He hesitated, then held up his phone. The screen showed a blurry photo taken in the woods. It was her, walking home the night before. But she wasn't alone. The pale, grinning figure stood just behind her, its long fingers brushing her shoulder. Lizzie's blood turned to ice. "Where did you get that?" "It's been going around. Some kid posted it online," Pete said. "Look, if you need time off." She didn't hear the rest. She left the diner in a daze, her mind racing. By the time she reached her house, the sun had set, and the oppressive darkness had returned. The lights flickered as she stepped inside, and the air felt colder than it should. On the kitchen table was a note, written in spidery, uneven handwriting. "You're late again." Her breath caught, and the knife she'd grabbed the night before was gone. The sound of skittering footsteps echoed from the hallway. Slowly, she turned, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. It stood there, taller now, its grin stretching from ear to ear, its glassy eyes reflecting her terror. The knife dangled from its bony fingers, dripping with something dark and viscous. Lizzie screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the thing's laughter, a deep, guttural noise that echoed endlessly in the tiny house. And then everything went black. When they found her 2 days later, the police couldn't explain the scene. The house was immaculate, no signs of a struggle. But Lizzie was gone, and on the wall, scrawled in dark, sticky letters, were the words: "Time's up." No one in Hollow Glen took the shortcut through the woods after that. The town of Valewood was a place where the sun never quite reached. It sat in a valley perpetually shrouded in mist, its streets lined with crooked houses that leaned into one another like conspirators sharing secrets. The people of Valewood spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting to the shadows as if afraid of what might be listening. They called it the Hallowing season, the time of year when the days grew shorter, and the nights stretched on forever. It was during the Hallowing season that Clara arrived in Valewood, seeking refuge from a life that had unraveled at the seams. Her husband was gone, her child stillborn, and her mind a fragile thing held together by threads of willpower. She rented a small cottage on the edge of town, its windows fogged with age, its walls stained with the ghosts of past occupants. The first night, Clara dreamed of the forest. It was not the dense, misty woods that surrounded Valewood, but a darker, more primal place. The trees were blackened and twisted, their branches clawing at a sky that pulsed with a sickly green light. She walked among them, her bare feet sinking into the damp earth, until she came to a clearing. In the center stood a table, laden with food, roasted meats, ripe fruits, and glistening pastries. But the food was wrong. The meats writhed as if alive, the fruits oozed black ichor, and the pastries pulsed like beating hearts. A figure sat at the head of the table, its face obscured by a veil of shadows. It gestured for her to sit, and though every fiber of her being screamed to run, she obeyed. The figure leaned forward, its breath cold against her skin, and whispered, "You are hungry. Eat." Clara woke with a start, her mouth filled with the taste of ash. The dream lingered, its images burned into her mind. She tried to shake it off, but the forest called to her, its whispers seeping into her waking hours. She found herself drawn to the woods, her feet carrying her deeper into the mist with each passing day. The townsfolk watched her with wary eyes, their whispers trailing behind her like shadows. "She's been marked," they said. "The forest will take her, as it has taken so many before." Clara ignored them, her obsession with the forest growing stronger. She began to paint what she saw in her dreams, the blackened trees, the pulsating sky, the feast that was not a feast. Her art became darker, more visceral, the colors bleeding together in ways that made her stomach churn. She couldn't stop. The forest demanded it. One night, as the Hallowing season reached its peak, Clara ventured into the woods. The mist clung to her like a second skin, the air thick with the scent of decay. She followed the whispers, her footsteps echoing in the silence, until she found the clearing from her dream. The table was there, just as she had painted it, the food writhing and pulsating in the dim light. The figure was there too, its veil of shadows shifting like smoke. It beckoned her forward, its voice a low, guttural hum. "You are hungry. Eat." Clara hesitated, her stomach twisting with revulsion. But the hunger was there, gnawing at her insides, a void that demanded to be filled. She reached for a piece of fruit, its skin slick with black ooze, and took a bite. The taste was indescribable, sweet and bitter, metallic and rotten. She gagged but couldn't stop. She ate and ate, her hands tearing into the food with a desperation that terrified her. The figure watched, its laughter echoing through the clearing. "You are one of us now," it said. "The feast is eternal, and so is your hunger." Clara's body began to change. Her skin grew pale and translucent, her veins black and pulsing. Her eyes darkened, the whites disappearing until only voids remained. She tried to scream, but her voice was gone, swallowed by the forest. The townsfolk found her days later, wandering the edge of the woods. She was unrecognizable, her body twisted and emaciated, her mouth stained with black ichor. She tried to speak, but the words that came out were not her own. "The feast is eternal," she rasped. "And so is your hunger." They burned her body, but the whispers remained, carried on the wind, seeping into the minds of the townsfolk. One by one, they were drawn to the forest, their hunger growing until it consumed them. The Halloween season never ended, and the feast continued, its table always full, its guests always hungry.